Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us today, watching this video from wherever you may be. My name is Kayla Gori, and I'm the instructional designer in the Office of Digital Learning and Instructional Design Services. And with me today is Professor Victor Azuaje, and he is an associate professor, right? Associate professor of Hispanic
Professor.
Studies.
Professor.
You're a full professor. I'm
Yep.
sorry, you're a full professor now.
Well,
Congratulations.
thank you.
And we are going to talk about communication and collaboration in hybrid classes. Victor can tell you a little bit about his background with hybrid teaching, but I know from my work in the office that he is definitely one of our strongest hybrid teachers at the college. So having his voice today is really important to us, and we're happy to have him with us today.
Well, hey, thank you.
So Victor,
Always,
do you want to tell the watchers a little bit about your experience teaching hybrid classes here?
I'm teaching. Well, the main experiences was last year when we switched to the hybrid mode because of the pandemic. Before that, I had the classes online, and I was using some version of hybrid classes in my own courses, particularly the basic Spanish classes. And when we saw what was coming, I think I remember that was at the end of the November 2019. We have that some insight that something was coming, that it was going to force us to move to hybrid, probably in during the spring semester. So I was one of the decisions I made when that spring was I included a strong portion. We're talking about like 25% of the course online before any situation like official lockdown or something like that. So what happened then is when we went to lockdown, all my students were used to the whole environment. So for them, even though it was stressful on one side, in terms of the lockdown and moving to online, for them it was more like, okay, we've been working 25% of our all of activities were in hybrid mode, uh, being in the classroom, being online. Now it's just going from 25% to 100%, and that helped them a lot. It was like, okay, yes, we are ready. I mean, they had all the tools available to them. They were ready for the situation, and that was it. That the big experience was the transition. So it wasn't that
Mm.
traumatic for us.
Yeah,
And then
they had a
we,
taste of what to expect a little bit because you set it up as such.
yes, I mean, I was thinking something is going to happen.
Mm,
We better get ready just in case. So 25% of the course was hybrid. We were moving between online resources in class, and then you just make the switch in March from 25% to 100%. And then when we had the idea about the high flex, it was a different situation, but the same approach
mhm.
is we know what's coming in last fall. Now, what kind of tools do we need for the hybrid, this real hybrid, what the high flex
Mhm.
um, modality with rotation of students in groups, one group online, one group at the same time in the classroom. So it was the same idea.
Mhm.
In terms of experience, I think that pre-pandemic was the sense that we had at the college that we could be ready, that we didn't, our students didn't need that kind of traumatic transition that happened in some places.
Mhm.
Because we were expecting something, that we had the idea about
Mhm.
something is going to happen.
Yeah. So in courses that you taught prior to the pandemic and throughout since the pandemic, what were some of the things that you feel in terms of communication were so important to keep the success going? Because I think in my experience, not only in this field, but as an online student myself, I got my master's degree online years ago. Having that direct connection with my instructor that might not be even in the same state as me at the time, was what made me feel supported, what made it feel like I could have a successful experience. So what were some of the things, the actual actions that you would take or strategies that you employed that you feel were really valuable in that manner?
Well, first, when I was thinking about how to teach in this kind of situation, I went for the sense that the student needs to be the notion of autonomy. The student needs to somehow self-endorse what is happening. Uh, if the student is going to do something, you don't want to control the student. This is not about, I want you to do this, or we are required you to do this.
Mm-hmm.
This is more about when I'm talking to the student, when I'm sending an email, when I'm creating those assignments, I need to think in terms of how could I give the student more autonomy. Sometimes we have this misconception about the perfect place for to communicate with the student is face to face. When it's in person, it's perfect because I have the visual clues, I have the tone of my voice, I have everything in place for communication. But communication is not only about could the student receive the messages, could I at the same time see how the student is receiving the message and the reaction. So I have to keep that in mind. The conception that communication is going to solve all the problems because in face I have more clues. I need to have some kind of philosophy, some kind of ideas about what I want to communicate and how I'm going to communicate. So that's first. I'm going to try to develop that notion to help the student with her own notion of autonomy. The student needs to feel that somehow she's in control of the learning experience. Okay. And the other thing is, of course, the sense of competence. And then I'm going to work with the notion of connection, the relatedness. So things that I'm going to do, well, for example, students are sending emails to me, and I need to keep track of those emails. I don't want the student to receive an answer or just I miss a message. I want to minimize that opportunity for miscommunication. I don't want that. So one thing I did was then for example, in my Outlook, I created a folder only for the student messages. And I designed a rule based on the man's features where almost all the messages from my students, they go through to that folder and I see them right away. So the first is I don't have my students' messages, for example, by email. I don't have them mixed with all the messages from different administrative issues, division issues. I don't have those. My messages, the messages from the students and my messages to them, they have a specific place in my email system. So that's one thing. That is helping me then to answer their emails in a relatively short time. Usually I don't expect 24 hours. And that's the other thing. I know that we don't like the notion of, well, the students are expecting answers almost right away because we are now in the time of the media, Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, WhatsApp, and all those media applications. And it's kind of instant, but that's the way they see the relationship between people, kind of instant. So yes, I have guidelines, 24 hours, 36 hours, I'm going to answer your emails, but usually I don't go beyond the 24-hour framework to answer those. And that is one way to communicate with the student. You are sending the message and then the student sees you as a person that is present in the online situation. Because remember, if we're in a hybrid situation, we see the student in the classroom, but then the student is going to be outside of the classroom sometimes in synchronous mode and sometimes in asynchronous mode. And
Mm-hmm.
on those two occasions and those two modalities, we want the student to feel somehow that we are present. So first, email messages. Um,
Yeah, I think you touched upon something really important too, which is sort of the idea of expectations, setting expectations,
mhm,
right? So something like a simple statement in your syllabus that they read on the very first day of class that says, I will respond within 24 to 36 hours. I will do my best to respond even sooner than that on occasions, or even setting expectations for their own communication. You know, uh, I prefer to see emails coming through from your Mount St. Mary email, or, you know,
mhm,
and it's not so much about the expectation itself, but just the fact that there are expectations for communications for each party, right? The
mhm.
students have expectations, and also you as the instructor will have some expectations for yourself, and you want them to know, I'm present, I'm engaged, and I expect that for you as well. I want you to be present and engaged. So it has sort
Totally.
of like a dual purpose, right? You're
Um,
setting expectations for the actual communication, but you're also showing them that there's an expectation of engagement.
oh yes, automatically in terms of the rules, for example, my rule is pay attention to the domain my.msmc.edu. So the rule is filtering their messages, and they know this.
Right.
What happens if they are using other accounts? They know that it's not going to go through that specific rule, that filter, and probably I'm not going to see that email in the
Mm-hmm.
same way, or it's gonna take long for me. So they
Yeah.
know the expectation that I have of them, and then I try to commit to my deadlines in terms or my time, my framework in
Right.
terms of 24 hours the most. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
I have the 20 36, but 24 for me is like critical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Beyond that, the student probably is asking about some kind of assignment
Mm-hmm.
or resources, and it's too late. It's like
Right.
no, it's not possible.
Especially in most of hybrid classes that occur here outside of the pandemic have been accelerated.
Mhm.
So they're, you know, in condensed formats, 8 weeks ish. And those timeframes are critical, because if you have, you know, a module that's a week long and it's Wednesday, but your forum is due on Thursday, and, you know, that that could mean a difference in somebody's grade.
Mhm.
So, you know,
Exactly.
it's important to set those expectations, certainly. And I know through my work pre-pandemic and also during the pandemic, one of the themes that found really important to work with faculty on is finding mechanisms to receive messages. So you just described one that worked really well for you,
Yes.
through,
Yeah.
you know, setting that rule in your inbox.
Mhm.
There was another faculty member that I worked really closely with through the pandemic who decided they wanted e-class to be the central location for everything. For their own mind, it was easier for them to just have it all happening
Exactly.
on there. So they set up a forum on there that was sort of like a course Q&A forum. And they made it very clear in the message, in the description for the forum, that this is meant to discuss questions amongst each other about the material. So if they had a question about the material, the reading, the assignment, what have you, it was a forum in which they could ask those questions. And the faculty member actually found that through that opportunity, the other students would be able to sort of jump in and sometimes answer questions,
Mhm.
or the sort of hidden benefit of it was that everybody was able to see the answer to the question. So the faculty member in reflection found, wow, you know, this is going to actually work for me outside of teaching hybrid or high flex during the pandemic. I think this is something I could use later,
Mhm.
because it minimized the amount of individual back and forth happening, and it captured more people at once. So that was an interesting thing for that particular faculty member. I remember that being sort of an aha moment for them
Mhm.
in
I have
terms
a
of
different.
communication.
I use the forum, and on addition to that kind of forum, I have the e-class. It's important, and again, remember we have then this is hybrid, and it's not only that I answer questions, for example, face to face, and then I have that the forum, but
Hmm.
also in the forum I have a different forum in which students each week I call it el café semanal. It's cafe and the weekly cafe. What do they do there? I just want them in, and for my classes, they are in Spanish, but
Mhm.
basic Spanish classes, I just want them to write, small message telling me how the week was,
Yeah.
and talking to to their classmates. That's what
Mhm.
I want them to do. So that is Saturdays and Sundays. They have only those 2 days and to do that, and they leave messages and just telling me sometimes how the week was, commuting. They could leave, post pictures. I had a student last during the summer. Wow, some videos were incredible. I mean, we were having a lot of fun. I mean, the whole class with those videos, about his family, his pets, and so on. So that's one way we could use that informal situation, because then remember, it's based on the notion that we want to create a community,
Yeah.
a sense of relatedness. The
Mhm.
students are relating to each other, they're relating to me. Then I have that's one thing. They write all those messages, again, short messages, or post pictures, of videos, and I have that commitment. I i read every single one of them, and I just write, one line, 2 lines comments,
Mhm.
all single one of them.
Yeah.
And that is, let's say, a non-academic thing, in the sense that we're not talking about content, we're not talking about anything, but in online, the online setting, asynchronous, synchronous, we know that is crucial for the success of the student, that the students is connecting
Yeah.
to.
Creating that sense of community that
Exactly.
it happens naturally in the classroom.
So that's one thing. So that's one use of the forum in my class.
Mhm.
Then I have, in that same section, I have one where the students, for example, they are looking for a partner. And at that point, since they know each other because of the messages, then they go to that forum saying, I need a partner for the next assignments, and
Mhm.
totally different. So it's great idea. Forums are not limited to, let's say, the academic, that the content resource, um, situation.
Mhm.
We want to create, I think, because it's all the studies about online education. Uh, they have this emphasis in this the sense that students feel disconnected. So
Mhm. Isolation. Yeah.
we want them to come together. So of course, now these students in the hybrid situation, they see each other,
Mhm.
let's say once a week and or twice, and then they are in online, probably the same amount of time.
Mhm.
We don't want them to get lost.
Right. Right.
The connection is still there.
Yeah. Great
So
points.
it's,
So you touched upon collaboration a little bit, right? So
mhm.
you mentioned that through the communication pathways that you have, that students can sort of work together on materials. So what are some of the ways that you've done that in your hybrid classes, where you've facilitated maybe some collaborative works so that your students are working together?
Well, there are, in the old ways, one of the things that I missed about the our previous implementation of Moodle, we had, this this version of the, it's not version, it's the Zoom. We had some limitations with the Zoom works. I mean, it's just a limitation of Zoom, but in
Hmm.
Moodle we had this option. I'm not going to mention the one that, and the students were able, for example, to talk to each other. To I created the groups, and then the moment I created the groups, they were able to go into the connection, and they have, like a Moodle, a Zoom session, but they
Hmm.
could open it on their own because they were
Okay.
part of the group, and
Yeah.
they record messages to each other. They had the conversations,
Hmm.
presentations, everything in there. So that's one way. I mean, and I think that was the most effective during the pandemic and during the 2019 spring semester. Students were in love with that option.
Hmm.
Um, whatever that people say about Zoom, it has certain limitations.
Hmm.
No, no doubt about it. So
Yeah.
that's one thing. Also, we have for asynchronous situations, we have the Poodle.
Yes. I was
That's
hoping
another
you
one.
would speak on that because I know that you are a big proponent of that. And especially in a foreign language course like what you teach, being able to record is a great assessment tool, I'm sure, but also another pathway to sort of create community in the class. So
Oh
I'd
yeah.
love to hear what you have to say about that.
Then I for everything in terms of when it's one student, not when it's two or three, but Poodle is great. If I want my students to communicate to other students, we used to also to work with uh, different tools, but that's my philosophy in terms of what we do in hybrid
Hmm.
is I don't multiply the tools. I don't want the student to be working with 5, 6, 7 different tools. I want the student to be limited to 2 environments. In my case is my textbook and the e-class.
Hmm.
If I have some courseware that I'm using, it's going to be from the textbook. If students know that one, that's one tool. The other one is the e-class. So when they are doing these presentations, individual presentations, well, when they introduce each other, they have to record their videos. And there are rubrics about how the video should look. For example, they can't do the I'm gonna talk. Let's say this. I'm gonna talk to the professor, and then I see a kind of empty space. No, it's in the rubric. I I say you should be visible. I
Hmm.
just I want to hear you, and I want to see you because this is an individual presentation. But they have options through, for example, the courseware to meet and to do some dialogues. I mean, they talk to each other, they record the dialogue, and they submit that to me. But they could do that in our previous implementation in our Moodle system. So there are in classes, for example, we have these uh, also, but in more advanced classes, not in my basic classes, so culture classes. Right now, my students, for example, are working with, in my culture class, they are working with the notion of la chancla, the flip flop, and that is for some is a way of discipline, but then they are debating about this, about the pros, cons, well, people who are in favor, people who are against it, and they are working this using Google Docs, and they are creating these maps, to show the flow with the thinking.
Hmm.
Next week, they are going to work, for example, again, since I have a strong group of women in one of my culture classes, they are going to adopt the role of La Malinche. This is a character in Mexico, and it has a profound impact in the history of Mexico. And then they are going to act as advisors to the Aztec, let's say to the Aztec leaders. And how are they going to do this? Well, working in groups, they are going to present to the Aztec leaders, in this case, to the rest of the class, the strategies, the suggestions they have about how to face the conquistadors, the Spaniards. But if they are in class, but mostly all of the assignments, they do those assignments outside of class.
Hmm.
So even though we are in an in-present situation, I'm still working with a lot of those tools that we use in the past. So, uh, but again, no more than 2. In this case, I'm going with only essentially in that class 2 tools, e-class and some Google Docs,
Hmm.
but always under that philosophy. If I go to 3, it's like too much.
Yeah. Yeah, that was definitely something that I know when we got feedback from students over the last year on the course level and then through surveys and what have you, that one of the things that really benefited them was having a more structured learning environment in which they can predict where things will be taking place, right?
Mhm.
Um, I know that classes that were really gung ho and started out and they were like, well, we have our textbook and then I have a few things on e-class and then we're also going to be using this. And, it just got a little too much overwhelming, right? A little too
Cognitive,
overwhelming.
yeah. We need to avoid the cognitive overload. We don't want the
Yes.
students like being overwhelmed by 4 or 5 different
Hmm.
tools in the classroom. We
Yep.
want them to be like, okay, we're gonna see the same kind of tools. The activities are going to be different.
Sure.
The things that is new is what you're doing. Now,
Hmm.
how you're doing it, it's going to be the same. It's like
Right.
in the old days, nobody said something, okay, we have pencil and only the notebook, and this is going to be boring. We need more tools.
Yeah. Yeah.
Usually was the activities are the things that are new, but the
Hmm.
tools were the same. We have the book, we have the notebook, we have the pencil,
Hmm.
and probably that's it.
That's a
And
great analogy. Yeah.
so there is nothing wrong in this hybrid environment with saying, I'm going to stick to two, no more than three. If
Hmm.
two is the ideal situation. So I'm going
Yeah.
to communicate with the students through that channel. And that's the other thing. For example, I have the e-class and I have the courseware for my from my textbook. So
Hmm.
when I sending a message, for example, they know that every Sunday morning I'm going to send an email telling them that kind of giving some messages about what we're going to do that coming week. So,
Hmm.
and they know I'm reminding them, oh, hey, remember on Tuesday you have this, on Thursday you have this, and another reminder. This is going to be in the, let's say, in the courseware in the website of the textbook, Saturday and Sunday, a
Hmm.
week ahead. But then they know that it's going to be every Sunday morning.
Predictability. Yeah.
And that's another way of giving them certain notion of the professor is there.
Yeah. And I think you're touching on something else that's very important about the frequency of communication, right? So in hybrid classes, you do have the advantage of seeing them sort of on a consistent basis. Might be once a week. In other courses, it might be a little bit more than that, but minimally, usually once a week or once every 2 weeks or so in a hybrid, traditionally hybrid class, not necessarily pandemic hybrid, but in those that are categorized as real hybrid classes. So have you found that there's a balance in that? Because I think in my experience, there is a balance, right? There's a balance between sending too many messages, but not sending enough at the same time. And I think sending weekly, if you're following sort of a weekly calendar, doing one weekly message, which capstones, what to expect. Here are the resources. Here are ways to get in touch with me, sort of just, again, touching base instead of sending, maybe even daily things, which could be quite overwhelming, especially if they're taking other classes,
Yeah,
if they're
they're
taking
gonna they're gonna
30
say,
credits.
professor, you're spamming me.
Yes, exactly. And then of course you have all the other messages from the college and news, and things get lost.
Exactly.
So have you found that that's a real balance in your experience?
My experience is one overall kind of message for the week. It's first for myself. Okay, that's not a lot of work. It's one day I send the message for the week. For them, it's the same experience. They know, okay, Sunday, Professor Azuaje is going to send the email. And since I have the announcement system in my courseware, so I post the same message in 2 different channels. They're going to see
Mm-hmm.
that. So because sometimes some students are going to say, I missed the email. Yeah, you
Mm-hmm.
miss the email, but you can't miss the other one because you
Right.
know that on some days I'm sending that message for
Mm-hmm.
at least 2 channels. I'm using 2 channels to do this, but only once a week. I'm not sending any more reminders during the week.
Yeah.
That's it. And also because at least for some classes, for example, for my basic Spanish classes, they know that everything that is due is going to be, for example, tutorials they are going to be due on Saturday. All
Hmm.
the exercises Sunday, and that's going to be through the semester.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's like,
They know.
yeah,
The
I'm gonna
predictability
remind them.
factor is there.
They know that automatically. That's gonna
Hmm.
be, it's a consistent kind of structure for the entire semester.
Hmm.
Helps them then to predict what's gonna happen.
Yeah.
It's that sense of, oh, I know how this course works.
And that definitely speaks to what you talked about at the very beginning of the conversation was the accountability, right?
Yeah.
If students know that there's a pattern here, right? I'm going to know that these things are due on Saturdays and I need to engage with this on Sundays and what have you, that it does give them the tools to be accountable. It's
Oh
not
yeah.
it's not really you saying outwardly, you have to do this, right? But it's giving them this sense of ownership that, this is my learning experience and this is what I have to do. And I know when I have to do it. So you're building the confidence of the student at the same time.
That they come to you, they can't say anything like, Professor, I didn't know that that thing was due on Sunday. The exercises were due on Sunday. Because since the very beginning of semester, we had the conversation. I told them about that structure. And then through the semester, they see the calendar. That's another thing. Remember,
Mhm.
communication is not just I'm talking to the student, I'm writing to the student. Is that
Mhm.
also the way I organize the information? For example, in the
Absolutely.
E class. So in the E class, they have a calendar. In the courseware, they have a calendar.
Mhm.
And the calendar is telling them what's coming, what's due
Mhm.
in both places. So since I'm using some kind of gamification kind of mm, approach to my, for example, my basic Spanish courses, for them is you have two worlds, okay? You have the world of the courseware, the textbook, and you have the e-class. And you make points and you have some kind of quests, that's my
Mhm.
word in the system. In the e-class, you have another quest in the courseware.
Mhm.
And both of them are adding value to your experience through the semester in terms of, for example, grades.
Mhm.
And that's the other thing they know for communication again. It's not only about messages, verbal messages, it's about what the information they receive from me. I
Mhm.
try to keep them, for example, since I have levels, then the moment a level is done, they go to the next level. All the information in terms of grades is there.
Mhm.
So I'm always telling them, you don't need to wait for midterm grades to know how you're performing in
Mhm.
this class.
Yeah.
You know what you're doing because the moment one level is done, you see all the grades and you know how much weight that level had. And right away, they have that information. So it's the feedback
Yeah.
is also part of the communication.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I wish I could be a part of one of your courses. It sounds like so much fun. Um, I think, you made some great points about, I think the bread and butter, right? The bread and butter of these kinds of courses, underpinning it all is a structured way of communicating with students, one that makes sense, not only for the students, but for you to minimize the amount of work that you yourself have to do to
Mhm.
manage the learning experience along the way, and finding mechanisms that make a lot of sense for that situation to happen, allows for that to happen. So thank you so much for sharing all of your experiences, and
You're welcome.
your foresight on things is really valuable, and we really appreciate everything, Victor.
It was a pleasure.
All right, thank you.
Bye.